Hi class, welcome to Module 19, Week 10. Can you believe it? We've actually come to the end of the online gardening class. We hope you guys have really enjoyed it, and we look forward to having more classes for you. And so as we move into this week, you're probably going to notice something new on the website when you go there. What we've done is we put up a donation button for anyone who would like to make a donation to help fund more of these classes. They're always going to be free. That's what we decided. We're never going to charge anything for our classes. But if anyone can and would like to make a donation to help with the materials and everything like that, we would really appreciate it. But feel free to always enjoy these classes for free. No guilt. They're there for you. So now we're going to move into talking about herbs in the home garden. And one thing that we want to know is what's the difference between an herb and a spice? Because they are different really, but the truth is herb and spice are culinary terms. They aren't botanical terms. They're kind of like fruits and vegetables. Even though fruit is a true botanical term, when we're talking about it in culinary instances, it's not the botanical term. So fruits and vegetables, thinking about those in the grocery store and how you differentiate those, well, herbs and spices are the same way. It's not so much a botanical differentiation, it's how they're used and what parts of the plant are used. So here we're going to tell you some differences between herbs and spices. One, herbs are the leaf of the plant. In almost all cases, when we're talking about herbs, we're talking about the plant's leaves. And they can be either used fresh or dried, multiple ways they can be used. But with herbs, we're talking about the leaves. Now with spices, we're talking about anything but the leaves. So with that, we're talking about the roots, the berries, the seeds, the bark, the stems, the flowers. Anything but leaves would go into the spice category. And herbs, like I said, are used fresh or dry, but spices are almost always used dried. That's the way that they're usually used. Spices also usually have a more intense flavor, as we got here. They're a little more pungent, so you usually use smaller quantities. Herbs in themselves are less potent. And so you can use more of those without really going off the scale one way or the other. Spices, on the other hand, you really want to measure when you're using those. And herbs are mostly native to the temperate climates, whereas spices are mostly native to tropical climates. Now, when you live in an area like that, where we live down here in New Orleans, sometimes you can grow some of the spices that are more tropical. If the winter comes along and freezes them, then you've lost them. But there are some areas, semi-tropical type areas like New Orleans, where you can grow some of the spices and many of the herbs. But generally, herbs are in temperate climates and spices are in the tropical climates. Now, here I've listed some herbs and spices to show you what I was talking about with the different parts of the plant that they come from. On the left here, we have the herbs. We've got thyme, sage, oregano, parsley, marjoram, basil, chives, rosemary, cilantro, and dill. With those, we're using the leaves, and those are herbs. On the right-hand column, we list some spices. Cinnamon, that is actually the bark of the tree, is what is the scent, where we get cinnamon from. Ginger, that's the root. Clove is a flower bud. Saffron, that's actually just the stigma from the flower. It's from an orchid flower, an orchid crocus. It's a crocus that it comes from, and it's just the stigma from the flower of that particular crocus that is used for saffron. Nutmeg, again, that's a seed. Vanilla, it is a spice, and it's the immature fruit of an orchid, a vining orchid. Chili powder, that's the fruit. Cumin, those are seeds. Black pepper, again, that's the fruit that we're using, and it's a spice. And then these last two, as you can see, they were in italics. On the left side, we had cilantro and dill leaf as herbs. On the right side, if you use the seeds from those same plants, then you have coriander and dill seed. And those both would be considered spices because we're using the seed. It's the same plant. You can use the leaf or the seed of cilantro and dill.
There are many reasons to grow herbs in our home gardens, beyond just the simple culinary delights. Now, there are many herbs that are used for cooking that we are able to grow at home, and what I really enjoy about that is that there are cuisines from all over the world that use different flavors and different herbs and spices, and you can incorporate that right in your home garden. So it's really a nice kind of cultural flair and you can really spice things up in the kitchen with your herbs. It's also great for pollinators. Many of these herb flowers attract pollinators. They also attract beneficial insects. That's part of the reason why I incorporate my herbs and plant them in my garden, in my vegetable garden, or just set pots throughout that area, because they're attracting those bees, those butterflies, those hummingbirds, and also beneficial insects like ladybugs and lacewings. So it's a natural pest control strategy to provide some habitat through planting herbs and incorporating them next to my vegetable plants. That's that IPM that we've talked about before. Butterflies and hummingbirds prefer flowers with long tubular structures. That's so that they can get their long tongues in there and get the pollen or the nectar out of the bottom of the flowers. And a lot of herbs do have those long tubular flowers. Pineapple sage is one of my favorites. It's a hummingbird magnet. All the salvias, the sage, rosemary, even mint have those tubular shaped flowers, and they really do attract a lot of pollinators, hummingbirds, and moths. Fragrance. A lot of herbs are grown for use in little sachets or potpourri when they're dried down. Many herbs are super fragrant. Even if you're just walking through the garden, you can enjoy them. And we actually do have an aromatic garden here that we'll show you here in the New Orleans Botanical Gardens, where it really is just wonderful to walk through and smell all the different things. It's really delightful. Garden delights. Many herbs, whatever their primary purpose, so their primary purpose may be culinary, they also make wonderful garden plants that release their fragrance as you're walking through. So when I'm working in my garden, I'll often just pick a few mint leaves and smell them, or some rosemary. It really does make gardening a joy. These next two slides are the common herbs that we grow in our gardens here, and some cultural information. So this is for your reference, these next two slides, and we'll include this with the resources, so don't feel like you need to absorb it all at once. But what the chart shows is each herb, the germination temperature, the days to germination, whether it's direct seeded or transplanted, the days to harvest, spacing, light conditions, whether it's an annual, a perennial, or a biennial, and whether or not you can propagate it from rooted cuttings or division. So this again is for your reference, and we'll include this information for you in the resources link.
Okay, so we're going to talk about growing herbs now. Growing herbs can be fairly simple. They like to be grown in ground or in raised beds or in containers, so there's a lot of choice there. Herbs are one of the main container plants grown by home gardeners, so it's very common for somebody to have at least one type of herb in some kind of pot in their garden. Herbs can be annuals, biennials, or perennials, so they can live 1 year, 2 years, or many, many years. They're best to grow them grouped by type. So you can grow annuals and biennials together in the same area, but you want to keep the perennials separate. You don't want to be messing around the roots of the perennials when you're trying to change out these annuals and biennials as their season ends. So it's best to separate those so you don't damage the perennials. And most herbs thrive in full sun, so choose a partial to full sun site. Again, they need that energy from the sun to thrive, and most of the herbs do need lots of energy to grow. They do prefer a well-drained soil. I think, unless you're growing a rain garden and you pick these specific plants that will survive in these wet conditions, most of our edible stuff are not suitable for those environments, so they like well-drained soil. It does like high organic material, and the pH is between 6 and 7, so nice right there in the neutral area. Fertilize. Don't guess soil test. This is what we say all the time. Again, there's already nutrients in the soil, and you don't know if you're adding too much unless you have that soil test. Herbs do need to be fertilized. Unlike some popular opinions, they do actually need that extra bit of nutrient to have them, at their best performance. You can use, it's best to use a balanced fertilizer, and you can use a slow-released fertilizer or organic fertilizers, which tend to be slow-release anyway. You mix that into the soil at planting, and then sprinkle it over the soil every 3 to 6 months. Replenish the organic matter annually. Now, whether you're growing a perennial where it's going to stay in the soil all the time, it's still good to add a little bit on top. But if you're doing your annuals and perennials, go ahead and add that organic material to the soil between plantings. That's a good way to keep that up. Water only when dry. Most of our herbs, again, they like that well-drained soil, but most of them really like to have, dry feet, and you can get some real root problems if you have the soil is too moist all the time. Mulch, again, for moisture and weed control. You can mulch in containers. Mulch isn't just for in-ground gardens. It's perfect for raised beds and container gardens as well. It not only does the weed and moisture control, but it also looks more attractive. And locate the herbs to make harvesting convenient. The ideal situation is right outside the kitchen door, right? If you want to have an herb garden, that's as close as you can get to where the action's going. Maybe a little window thing. Some of these little window gardens that they sell do have difficulty getting the amount of sunlight they need, unless it's in a really well-lit area. Most of them just won't get enough sun, so be careful with that. And then Anna's going to come back and talk about the different kinds of herbs we grow and little tips on some of them.
These next 3 slides, we've broken out the herbs into 3 different heights so you can kind of plan your herb garden and know what to expect if you've never grown these before. The first list is low growing and spreading herbs. Some of these will actually spread and form a carpet or a mat-like form in your garden, or you can put them in a container and they'll spill over the edge. So first and foremost, we have chives. Now there's English chives and garlic chives. They're both kind of upright, but they tend to stay under a foot tall. Cilantro, now they will get tall, but cilantro, when you harvest it, is typically about 6 to 8 inches tall, and then when it bolts and starts to form that coriander seed, it will get almost 2 feet tall. So keep that in mind while you're placing it in your garden. Same thing with marjoram. Now mint, some varieties will get a little taller than others. There's creeping varieties of mint. All mint will spread, so plant it carefully. But when it starts to flower, those purple flower spikes tend to get up maybe about a foot tall. Personally, when I grow mint, I like putting it in an area of the garden where I don't have to contain it. It will fill the space that you put it in. So having in a container is probably a best bet if you don't have a huge garden space to work with. Oregano does the same thing here in New Orleans. That's another low-growing, spreading herb. It stays fairly short, and it will spill over the edge of a raised bed or a container, so you can plant it along the edges if you'd like. Parsley, there's curly and Italian flatleaf varieties. Tends to stay under a foot tall, but then once it starts to bolt and flower, it will get a little taller than that. And parsley is actually a host plant along with dill and fennel for the swallowtail butterflies. So it's a good one to include in your garden. Now, rosemary comes in upright varieties, but here, because we're in the low and spreading herbs list, we've got the prostrate rosemary, and that's one that spills over and stays very low and creeps along. So that's the difference. The regular rosemary is on the next slide. It gets quite big, and it actually forms a hedge here in New Orleans. It gets that big. Summer savory, that's a little difficult to grow in our area, but that's another one that creeps. And then thyme. There's many different varieties of thyme, and they all tend to stay under a few inches tall and spread out into a nice little mat, and that's what you harvest. So these are your shorter herbs. Your medium to tall herbs would include anise and basil. There's many different kinds of basil. Coriander, again, that's your cilantro once it starts to flower, starts to bolt. Dill gets quite tall. Fennel. Now, dill and fennel look pretty similar in the garden, but fennel, remember, makes that bulb at the bottom, and that's what we cook with sometimes. And then there's that black swallowtail caterpillar in the upper right-hand corner hosting on that fennel. Lemon balm is another one. That's a great aromatic herb. Pineapple sage, rosemary, your standard rosemary, it can get a few feet tall here, actually. And then sage, the Salvia officinalis, that is just the common culinary sage. So there's salvias and sage, they're all related, and they can get a range of different sizes depending on the cultivar. Very tall herbs. We've got a few here. bay tree. We can actually grow bay leaf here in New Orleans. That is a very attractive tree, and I've seen some get 8 feet tall. Ginger and turmeric, I tend to group those two together. The culinary ginger gets about 4 to 5 feet tall if you let it, and then the turmeric is more of like 2 to 3 feet tall, depending on what variety you've got. Those are nice tropical herbs that we are very lucky we can grow here. And then lemongrass. That's a great grass that is used in a lot of different Asian and Indian food recipes, and it grows very easily. But it does get quite big. It forms a clump, sometimes 3 feet wide and about 4 feet tall. So put it somewhere where it can have some room, or keep it in a pot to keep it contained.
Okay, now remember Chris was telling you that whenever you're planting your herb garden or where you're going to plant your herbs, it's a good idea to keep your perennials and your annuals and biennials separate, because you don't want to be disturbing the roots of your perennial herbs every time you want to replace the annual herbs that die each year, or the biennials that will usually last no more than 1 year to 2 years. So, and then Ann was talking about the sizes of the different herbs. You know, the low growing herbs, and then the medium tall herbs, and then the very tall herbs. So we've looked at, you know, the different sizes of the herbs, and Chris said, you know, plan your garden with the different things. So what we're going to tell you now are some of the herbs that are classified as annuals or biennials, and then some that would be perennials. So you're going to be bringing all this information together as you plan your garden before you even start to plant your herbs. You want to have an idea of where they're going, how they're going to look when they mature, so you can have them properly arranged in your garden, and whether you're going to have to replace them each year or not. So these are your annual and biennial herbs. These are ones that are more commonly grown in home gardens. Anise, and that one you can either use the green seed or the mature seed off of that one, but it is an annual. And the basil, that one is one that people grow for all kinds of reasons, not just culinary reasons, because there are so many different types of basil. Which you can see we got here on the slide there on the right, we've got 3 pictures showing the multiple colors and types of basil. Some of them have gorgeous flowers that are in heads. Others have longer spikes of flowers that aren't quite so attractive, but if you like that, those are attractive. And there's different colors from the dark green, light green, purple, kind of reddish color, everything in between. And then there are different leaf types. You can have just straight, smooth, flat leaf, or you can go all the way to the super curly, sometimes called lettuce leaf basil. So basil is one that you can have multiple looks, depending on what variety you grow, but it is an annual, so you're going to have to replace it each year. In our area, they reseed themselves quite happily. So a lot of times with the basil, once you plant it, you've got it forever if you want. Another one is cilantro. Oh, I need to mention that with the basil, it does flower once it starts to warm up, but you can help to slow down the flowering if you're really growing it for the leaves by pinching those flower heads as soon as they start to form. And pinch the basil plant early, because it's going to want to make a real tall plant, but you pinch the top out early and it'll start to bush out. So it'll make a fuller plant. Cilantro, that's one that can go in sun or partial shade. It is an annual. It can grow it for the leaves early in the season, then let it continue to flower and make seed, and you've got the coriander seed. Dill is one that can tolerate a little bit drier soils than a lot of the herbs. As Chris mentioned, they all need to be well drained, and you only want to water once the soil starts to dry out. But dill is one of those, and fennel to some degree can tolerate drier soils if you forget to water them one day. And dill is grown for the leaf and the seed. And then there's the fennel. There's 2 different types, the leaf type and the bulb type. Bulb type is sometimes referred to as Florence fennel. And the main difference is that one of them, you're primarily interested in the bulb for use in cooking, and it is bred, those varieties, to make huge bulbs at the bottom of the plant. The leaf variety, they still have a little tiny bulb down there, but they've been bred more for their leaf and not so much for the bulb, so they aren't going to make one quite as big. Parsley, and as I already mentioned, flat leaf, curly type. It is a biennial, and if you have it growing it in an area where it doesn't get real cold in the wintertime, that's what turns the flowering on. So as a biennial, it needs to go through a cold season, and then the next year, after going through one cold winter, it'll flower. But if it doesn't go through a cold winter, it won't flower. It has to have that cold weather to turn on those flowering genes. So depending on how you're growing your parsley, you can actually almost turn it into a perennial by never letting it go through that cold season. And then summer savory, that one is one, Anna mentioned it's a little harder to grow in our area, but some areas it grows real easily. It is an annual as compared to winter savory. Winter savory is one that's grown as a perennial. Summer savory is grown as an annual. And the summer savory has a milder flavor than the winter savory. So a lot of people actually grow the summer savory in pots. So then, now we're moving into perennial herbs. Now these are ones that you would want to have kind of grouped amongst themselves and not with the annuals and biennials, because these are ones, once you plant them, they're going to stay there. And there's quite a few herbs that are perennials. That's why it's really nice to create an independent herb garden, because with a lot of these that are used as culinary herbs, or even just for their fragrance, or even as just for the pollinators, as you can see on the right there, pollinators love these herbs when they're flowering. And we go all the way from butterflies and honeybees to sweat bees. They all like the flowers of the herbs. And if you have a garden of perennial herbs, then you got something for all seasons. You always got new growth, which is usually what you use for cooking. You got the flowers, which the pollinators love. And this is a whole list of those. Now, bay leaf doesn't usually flower. That one's a small tree. Or you can prune it into multi-trunk and make a shrub out of it instead of a small tree. So it can be grown by anyone, just depend on how you prune it. And then chives, those are perennials. Their flowers are edible, so keep that in mind. You can add a little bit of color or something to what you're cooking by using the flowers instead of just the leaves. Ginger, that one you just let grow and harvest it as you need it, though it's usually you want to harvest toward the end of the growing season as it starts to go into its dormant phase. That's the best time to harvest your your ginger that you're going to use for cooking. But it is a perennial. Lemon balm, it is actually edible. It can be used, you can use the leaves in cooking to give a lemon flavor, or you can make teas from it. So lemon balm is one that's a perennial, and it has beautiful tall flower spikes. Marjoram, it is an oregano type. The marjoram and oregano are usually separated primarily because of a little bit of the growing differences and the flavor differences. They are actually different species. But marjoram, it spreads easily. It's a nice perennial. Mints are perennial. As Anna mentioned, they are invasive, both the peppermint and the spearmint. So you want to keep those in an area that it's either easy to remove those underground stems as they're growing and spreading, or they're in an area that you have some physical barrier stopping them from spreading. Or if you want to grow them in an area that you want to have overrun with mint, then you can just let them go wild. But mint is one that is very, very popular. It's probably the most popular herb grown, but it does spread and can become quite invasive. And we list peppermint and spearmint there as two types of mint that are grown, but if you look, there are all kinds of different mint varieties that are grown. Now, usually they are a type or a variety of one of these, like chocolate mint and orange mint, but there are all still mints. So keep that in mind if you're going to grow those. Oregano, the German is one of the popular German oregano that's grown. It is a perennial. Pineapple sage is perennial. As Anna mentioned, the pollinators love it. It has those tubular flowers, so butterflies and hummingbirds love it. But it is edible. You can eat the leaves and you can eat the flowers of pineapple sage. It has a kind of a different flavor. It's not what you would, when you think sage, it's not what you think of with pineapple sage, but you can use it in cooking to impart some flavors, and it is definitely edible. Rosemary, that one has very delicate flowers that pollinators love, and that's either the prostrate or the standard tall rosemary. Those are both perennial. And sage, now one thing about sage is it really, the culinary sage, the Salvia officinalis, it really does not like to have wet soil. So if you're going to grow sage, in our area, most people will grow sage, either use it raised beds or grow it in containers, because you want really good drainage if you're going to grow the Salvia officinalis. So keep that in mind if you're going to grow that sage. Thyme, again, it doesn't like wet soils either. It's not quite as finicky as sage, but thyme does not like wet feet. So keep it in a nice drained area. And turmeric, that one's probably a little less cold tolerant than some of the gingers that are grown, but you can grow turmeric. You can harvest the roots just like you would, or the rhizomes, just like you would the ginger ones at the end of the season. Give you a pointer though, if you're growing turmeric and you're going to harvest the roots or the rhizomes, which they technically are botanically, wear gloves and clothes that you might not ever want to wear again, because as we know, if you've ever grown turmeric or used it in the kitchen, that yellow stain does stain, especially if it's coming from the fresh rhizomes. So if you're out there harvesting them and it drips on your clothes, you might have it forever. So keep that in mind when if you're going to grow turmeric and harvest it.
So herbs do have some pests and disease problems that you have to watch out for. One of the main problems with some of the herbs is aphids. We've already talked about these, but they are small, soft-bodied, slow-moving insects with piercing, sucking mouthparts. Now, you know, what we see, it says slow-moving, but what we're seeing is the nymphal form of these aphids anyway. We very rarely see the adults. They're tiny little winged forms that are actually quite fast-moving, and as soon as you flip over the leaf, you probably won't see them because they're going to scatter to the wind. But that's how they are able to move around and move from plant to plant, is by these adults flying around looking for a food source. Mealybugs are another small, soft-bodied insect with piercing, sucking mouthparts. They're generally oval, white in color, and they're covered with a white, waxy material that makes them look almost like a fluffy cotton ball in appearance. The mealybugs do cluster together under the foliage and on stems. Spider mites are another problem. As we've discussed before, the spider mites are not insects, but rather they belong to the mite family. They are difficult to see, so you might need a hand lens or something to see them. But you can review more of that information in the pest lecture we did. Whiteflies are a big problem. They are small insects with 4 wings in color, and usually what you see with whitefly infestation is just this little cloud of white insects flying around when you get close. So as soon as you touch a shrub or something like that, you see these tiny little pinhead-sized white specks flying around. That's going to be your whiteflies. The best control measure for all of your enemies on your herbs is going to be more natural products like beneficial insects. You can use insecticidal soaps, horticulture oils, things like spinosad maybe. But you want to stay away from the harsher chemicals. You want something that has a 0-day interval between treatment and harvest. That way you don't have to worry about it. With herbs and spices, you tend to eat the whole thing, so you want to make sure that that is as green as possible when you're dealing with that. And some common diseases, you've got downy mildew, powdery mildew, leaf spots and blights, root and crown rots. So most of these are fungal diseases, and we already know that the fungal diseases are usually caused by these wet, warm conditions. So trying to avoid that is one of your best bets. With environmental controls, you're going to want well-drained soils to fight that problems with the roots. You could use resistant varieties. That's a very good way to pick to plan and get ahead of these disease problems. Again, Dr. Joe keeps pointing this out, no overhead watering. Every time you splash soil particles up from the ground onto the plant, you're really giving yourself an inoculum of that bacteria on the plant. Remove disease plants. So as soon as you start seeing problems, go ahead and pull them out of the garden. You know, there's no point in saving them. They're just going to spread that disease through other plants. And then mulch. Mulching, it keeps the soil in, but it also provides an insulation layer between the soil and the plant. So anytime rainfall or even overhead watering is less likely to splash that soil up onto the plants. So this could be yours, any one of these things, a situation where you have a large garden all the way to some containers in the windowsill, in-ground Raised beds, containers, all these things are possible with herbs. So go ahead and grow some in your garden. Now what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to take a walk outside and we're going to show you some actual herb gardens here at the Botanical Garden to give you some inspiration and show you how we're doing it around here.
Okay, now we're going to take a tour of what's labeled here in the Botanic Gardens, the aromatic garden. And that's one thing, like Anna mentioned, both of us, all three of us mentioned this, that one thing about herbs is most times they're pretty aromatic, and it's that pungency, those chemicals that they're making is what we're actually growing them for.
Yep.
And so we're going to take a stroll now through the aromatic garden and let you see some of these. Sorry there's no scratch and sniff video yet, but at least you'll know whenever you're walking through the garden center, you might see something you recognize and go over and kind of brush it and then smell, and you'll say, oh yes, I know this one. So let's take a tour, Anna.
Okay. Coming right through the walkway here, we've got an herb spiral, and this is really neat because there's different moisture levels. At the top it's really dry, and then at the bottom it tends to be a little more moist. So here we've got a variety of different herbs growing. This basil is just lovely. And remember, we did discuss that there are many different kinds of basils. And look at these flowers. A few seconds ago there were honeybees on the flowers. Here's some coming back. So this is not only a great culinary herb, but it's also a great pollinator herb for your garden. We've got some parsley down here. Now it is August in New Orleans, so it's looking a little rough, but it's still something that you could cook with, some of these fresher leaves, and I would probably trim some of those out. Down here you got some Cuban oregano, it looks like. That's something that has the oregano flavor, but it's a little more tropical, a little more succulent leaf, and it's used in a lot of Caribbean cooking, actually. That's why it's here. And here we've got the actual oregano. This looks like maybe Greek oregano, and I wish you could smell this. Very easy to grow, but see how it's spread quite a bit? This is something that you want to put in a section of garden where it can really take off. Now down here we've got some bronze fennel. Fennel comes in two different colors, green, and then this is the bronze. And it's got kind of a bronzy purple color to it, and it's starting to flower. That's an umbel right there. Over here, this is our pineapple sage, and I wish it was flowering because when it does, it has bright red flowers that are very tubular, and it's just a gorgeous plant for in our gardens. Very easy to grow also here in the subtropical climates. Down here, this is another basil. This looks like a globe basil. It's almost like a boxwood type. Has a great flavor, great smell as well. And then back here hiding is some lemon verbena. Now, when you smell this, it's got a fantastic lemony smell, almost like dish soap, like lemon dish soap. It's wonderful, and you can actually bake with this. I've seen a lot of recipes with shortbread that call for lemon verbena.
And then we move on back in this direction, you're going to see lots and lots and lots and lots of herbs, particularly the mints. Now, Anna's mentioning the pineapple sage. Here we have another one that's called the grape-scented sage. Yes, indeed. And there's multiple sages that you're going to see. Now, sage is a common name for plants that are the genus Salvia. Now, in culinary terms, usually when someone mentions sage, especially if it's called for in a recipe or anything like that, they're talking about the one particular sage, Salvia officinalis. That's the one that's mostly used for culinary purposes. But there are multiple sages that are gorgeous that you can grow in your herb garden. They are perennial in most cases, and they have very good fragrance. Some of them can be used for cooking, such as the pineapple sage. It is edible, not used very often such as like the common sage is. But then you have the grape-scented sage here, nice compact tight plant. Some sages can get really leggy. The grape-scented one tends to stay a little more compact. And then another pineapple sage here, and then we're moving into the mints. Now this is the true peppermint. You can see how this is being grown in a container on the wall. This is to contain it so it doesn't take over everything. So that's another way that could keep your mint under control, is to grow it in a container, elevate it, and just make sure it gets watered occasionally and some fertilizer. Then we got different mints growing down in these. Also, you can see containers to keep the mint under control, to keep it where it's supposed to be. This is another mint. Yes, you can always tell the mints. They have that great smell. Now here's a mint that has a little bit of a different look to it. It's still a mint. It's the Mentha genus. This one's called Habec mint. You look at the leaves are really different for what you would normally think of when you're thinking of mint. And mints also flower. They have really nice, all have these spikes of flowers. Some are a little compact, some are more like this. You can see that's something that pollinators love. Here's another mint that just looking at it you wouldn't be able to tell, but this one's called chocolate mint. It's supposed to have a nice chocolatey scent to it, a little bit of flavor to it. And then you're going to have, like we said, there's multiple mints, usually named by what they should smell or look like. This one's called ginger mint. Should have a gingery type smell to it. This one's a citrus mint. You see, I like the way this one grows. Really, you know, these tight, shorter leaf stalks with the leaves. This one's a citrus mint. This one down here is a apple mint. So it should have a apple, a little bit of apple fragrance to it. And so usually the mints, that's how they're labeled, by the scent that they give off.
Over here we've got a rosemary, and this is the upright rosemary. And you can see that it's flowering, and it's got these little lavender colored tubular flowers, and there are bees actively nectaring over here. This is lavender, and the trick to lavender in New Orleans is keeping it dry and in full sun. So this is actually at the top of this herb spiral. It's very well drained. These are Mediterranean herbs, both rosemary and lavender, so they don't really like wet feet. A lot of folks complain they have a hard time growing lavender in New Orleans. Usually it's because it's been too wet. This does not need any supplemental watering, and you can see it's in full sun, and it has flowered, and it's about to flower again. Over here we've got some thyme. Again, another Mediterranean herb. And it's looking a little rough, but this will come back once temperatures cool off. Over here we've got lemon verbena. This is another wonderful lemon-scented herb. It's in a lot of cocktails, and you can bake with it as well. It's gorgeous. It does flower. And then we've got our English chives down here. You see they're shaded a little bit. They like that, especially in the summer. You can grow these in part sun, and this will flower and make a purple flower as well. And then there's garlic chives, which we'll hopefully find some here in a second to show you, but that's really great in a lot of recipes. What's over here? Winter savory. I'm glad our savory is looking good today. This is used in a lot of fish and chicken dishes, and you can see it looks very similar to the other salvias and things in the Lamiaceae family. And that's a nice herb, and look at the flowers, there it is. So we do really grow these for their flowers as well. Bay tree back here. This is one of our tall herbs. It's actually a bay leaf tree. And down here in South Louisiana, we cook with the bay leaf a lot. It goes in a lot of different things like red beans and rice. But you can see it does make a large tree, but you can keep it pruned and kind of controlled. I've seen it grown successfully in a large container as well. It is an attractive evergreen shrub, and once it gets this big, you've got enough bay leaves to share with all your friends and family. Makes great gifts.
So now, in the botanic gardens, there are herbs that are used in different locations, and this one is in what's called the medicinal garden. And in this area, they're trying to put herbs that have been shown to have some medicinal usage and value. And you're going to love Dr. Kirk Ballard's presentation that you're going to have on this. It's interesting because you can see where the sign's hanging. It's hanging on a ginkgo tree. Now this is technically not an herb and not one that we talked to you about, but ginkgo, for anyone who's looked in the herbal section of any drugstore or big box store, you're going to find ginkgo in there, the ginkgo leaves, because of the qualities that it's supposed to have for you. And so here we have a ginkgo growing, and then underneath it we've got various mixture of herbs that have some type of medicinal value. Some of them have been researched and proven to have usage. Others are still under the research phase right now. Here you can see we mentioned turmeric. Here's a nice turmeric growing. Beautiful flowers. Turmeric, you could grow that if all you grew it for were the flowers. The ginger and the turmeric are both like or can tolerate the shadier environments. And this one's growing underneath the ginkgo tree. But you can see it makes a really nice looking plant, beautiful flower. And then of course, if you want it, the rhizomes are under there waiting for you. So here we're going to move from turmeric to the echinacea or the coneflower. Now this is one that there has been a lot of research done, and you probably have heard about it in the past several years, that the echinacea can actually reduce the incidence of colds or reduce their severity and their length. So echinacea is one that you can grow. It makes a beautiful plant. I love the flowers. Pollinators love it too, but it also has medicinal value. You can grow it for yourself as medicinal value, or just grow it for good looks and then take it out of the medicine cabinet whenever you want to use it to control your colds. Back here is one which isn't grown very often in the New Orleans area, but here it's looking pretty nice. This is horseradish. That one's grown for the root, really pungent, but if you like horseradish, you love it. If you don't, you just don't want to see it around.
Back here we've got some Monarda, which is also known as bee balm. That's used in a lot of medicinals as well. And St. John's wort, Hypericum, that's another one. It'll actually flower and it makes a nice attractive yellow flower, so it's a great ornamental, and it's actually native also. This particular variety is not, but we do have American Hypericums. This one's really fun. This is salad burnet, and it actually smells and tastes like cucumber. So this is a really great herb to sprinkle the leaves. These little leaves are very tender. You can sprinkle that in your salads. Down here we've got yarrow, depending on what part of the country you're in. It will form a dense ground cover, and it flowers in white, yellow, different pinks and shades of purple. And it's a medicinal, but also a great pollinator plant. I include this in my native plant garden for that reason.
Okay, now guys, I just have to stop here and have you take a look at this one. You can see it's a nice low-growing plant, and the leaves kind of look like violet leaves and such. Now this is one I'm not too familiar with as far as what it's grown for in the medicinal category, but take a look at its name. You can see how sometimes people get carried away with what herbs will do for you and how healthy they are.
Here in the medicinal garden we have aloe, and you can see it's in full sun, and this is a really great succulent as well. It's perennial in the New Orleans area. It will flower, and those flowers attract a lot of pollinators, especially our hummingbirds and sphinx moths actually. And then this aloe is fantastic on sunburns. I'm sure a lot of people have done that. If you've grown it as a house plant, you rub it on your sunburn, and it really soothes things. But it will spread. It's a great perennial for our area, and it doesn't need much to thrive.
Now we're going to move over to our kitchen garden. As Chris mentioned earlier, when he's talking about planting your garden, one thing which is nice to do with an herb garden is have it right near your kitchen door, because a lot of times herbs are the kind of thing that you're reading through, you're going through the recipe, or even if you're making up a dish yourself, and you start to cook and you think, oh wow, I think this would really be nice in this recipe. So you want to run out and chop some fresh herbs and mince them up and put them in there. So having it near your kitchen makes it really convenient. You don't have to go very far. You only harvest it when you need it. So you just go out there and grab it when you need it. And also, as Chris mentioned earlier, that's one of the reasons that you don't want to use harsh chemicals to control insects and diseases on your herbs, because using them, a lot of times it's spur of the moment. You're like, oh wow, this will be great in my recipe. I think I'm gonna go out and cut some and use it. Well, if you sprayed a harsh chemical on it, now you have to go back and look, okay, when did I spray it? What's the interval, the pre-harvest interval I have to wait once it's sprayed before I can use it? And did it harm the plant when I sprayed it? But if you don't use any of those types of chemicals on your herb garden, then you don't ever have to think about it. You can just go out there and grab them at will and use them. Just learn to tolerate a little bit of insect damage and a little bit of disease. And you see, this is one which we haven't seen on the tour yet. This is lemongrass. And as you can see, as Anna mentioned, I'm 6 feet tall. This is a pretty big plant. So this one's going to want its own spot. And if you don't give it its own spot, it's going to make its own spot. It is a perennial. And what you're usually using on these, you can use the leaves fresh, chop them up and make teas. A lot of times the stems that we see down here, these are harvested and the leaves are removed, and these sections of the stem are used in soups and other cooking, and that's one you can actually harvest the stems and freeze them and then just take them out and use them as needed in your recipes. So this is one that you haven't seen yet. Oh yes, it's definitely lemongrass. And if you grow that one, like I said, it's going to need its own spot. But here you can see there's a whole mix of the various herbs that we've talked about. We have oregano growing here. We have some mints growing in here. We have basil back here. This is actually mint marigold, so it makes a nice, beautiful little flower. We have rosemary growing out in the kitchen garden. You can go out and chop fresh rosemary to harvest. And here are those other chives that Anna was mentioning that you can grow. You see there's a little bit of a different format to them. The leaves are broader. And you still use these the same way you would use the other chive leaves. And we even have a little bit of thyme growing in here. We always have time for thyme.
Great. That's it.